internet. Today we're in a very beautiful and peaceful spot called Cold Springs, Minnesota, and we're at this hillside chapel that has a very interesting part of Midwest history. It's called the Grasshopper Chapel. It goes back to these biblical grasshopper plagues that we were experiencing in the 1800s, and I was reading a book about North Dakota history a few years back, and one of my main takeaways was, thank God we do not have these infestations anymore. They were just horrifying. These insects would eat through crops, wood, even clothes. It sounded horrifying. I actually went back to that book to recall some of these horrifying anecdotes about these plagues, and I'm gonna sit down over here and read you a couple of them. There's this little smaller shrine over here for St. Francis of Assisi. Okay, get ready for this. In the 1930s, the city of Mott, North Dakota, had to turn on its streetlights because the grasshoppers blacked out the sun. At Killdeer, the grasshoppers were piled up 4 inches deep. Railroads had to use extra sanding to help keep trains on the tracks, made slimy by crushed grasshoppers. And it wasn't even just that the grasshoppers were eating all the crops, they just seemed to taint everything. Like the chickens in the farmyards would gorge themselves on these grasshoppers to the point where their meat would be tainted, so you couldn't even eat the chickens. These grasshoppers were specifically the Rocky Mountain grasshopper, and I believe they were called that because they would come over the Rockies into the Midwest. And there's actually a glacier in Montana called Grasshopper Glacier because there was just a swarm of them coming through and they got caught up in a snowstorm and it just froze all of them in this ice mass. And you could at one point go out there and see them still frozen in there, but you know what, the glacier's melting. I don't believe there's any more that you can see up there, but it's still a cool story and it's interesting because they are extinct now. I know every animal has its place in the ecosystem and I'm sure they were important in some way, but I'll make my peace, I think, with these being gone from the earth. But anyway, back in the 1800s, farmers were doing just about anything they could think of to try and get rid of these things. They would burn the infected fields, they would try tarring them, smudge pots, but there was just so many that nothing was working. It would work in this cyclical cycle where the grasshoppers would move into an area, they just eat everything, destroy it, and then they would lay eggs that would hatch in the spring, and then it would start all over again. They'd move to a different area. So this has been going on for about 4 years when in 1877, the Minnesota governor actually enacted a statewide day of prayer. I can't even imagine them doing that now, what the public reaction would be. But anyway, they were encouraging people to pray the grasshoppers away. And the people in Cold Springs decided to build a chapel to the Virgin Mary to pray for the grasshoppers to leave their land. So let's head over to it now. I was just, like I showed you, sitting at the St. Francis of Assisi shrine. There's another one over there for Joseph, I believe, behind the chapel. Just really nice here. It's very peaceful. Like I was saying, it's on a hilltop. The highway's down there, so you can still hear a little bit of traffic, but it's still quite nice. This is the chapel. This isn't actually the original though, unfortunately. It was destroyed by a tornado and it had to be rebuilt in the 50s. The tornado actually lifted it off its foundation and dropped it on these trees right here, which is why they have such a weird shape. There's a little plaque over here about it. They look like they're in tree jail. It says, the chapel, which was originally made of wood, was lifted off its foundation and crashed onto these 2 oak trees. The beautiful oak carved statue of Our Lady of Victory was not harmed. If you're wondering what these little structures over here are, it's the Station of the Cross. Okay, on to the main event. Let's check out the inside. This is the relief over the door. Do you see the 2 grasshoppers kneeling to Mary? I should mention that the same month that they started building this chapel, the grasshoppers left. And they left before they laid eggs. So they didn't come back in the spring. And the curse was lifted. You know, until they came back in the 1930s and destroyed North Dakota, but you know, whatever. Let's go in. It's quite small in here. So there's just an altar. You can see there's no pews. Today is Sunday, but they don't hold regular services in here. They only have them in the spring and fall to pray for good harvest. So this is the original statue of Mary that survived the tornado from the original building. There's also these really cool engravings on the walls. Very cool. So that's the story of the Grasshopper Chapel. Hope you enjoyed it and thought it was interesting. I very much enjoyed reading about it. I thought this was such an interesting part of history that we just don't have to deal with really anymore, at least on that scale. And there are so many different interesting parts that came along with it, like finding that glacier in Montana and all about these grasshoppers. I don't know, it was very interesting to read about. And if you're interested in coming out here, it's near St. Cloud. Like I said, it's Crystal Springs, took me a second, Minnesota. And yeah, it's just to come out here. It's a very nice place. I'm sure it'd be very nice in spring. I saw that they do have a listing out by the parking lot of where their 2021 mass dates are. They have this altar in the back here. It looks kind of spooky, but I'm assuming that's just where they have masses when they hold them. The inside was definitely way too small for any people to be in there. So they must have mass out here, and everyone just sits out here. So there you go. Those are all the dates they're going to be open for spring, summer masses if you want to come check it out.